In this powerful continuation of my discussion with Jim, his struggle intensifies as he grapples with the emotional toll of being, and I quote, the container for his daughter's chaos. In this part of our conversation, we dive into a powerful question. When someone makes a request, especially in an emotionally charged relationship, how can you tell if the request is coming from a place of genuine need or if it's a disguised attempt to manipulate you? Over the course of our discussion, it becomes clear that Jim's need to, and I quote again, fix his daughter mirrors his own deeper vulnerabilities. As he grows more enmeshed with her emotions, his identification with his own helplessness leads him to deep emotional conflict. The difference between containment and correction becomes clear as I help Jim discover the healing power of genuine curiosity. Finally, I show him how paying attention to your own internal emotional response, such as feeling frustrated and angry with a loved one, are two of the clearest indications of what's really being asked of you. So much unfolds here as Jim begins to notice what his own emotions are trying to tell him. Let's listen in as he continues to untangle the deeper dynamics at play. Since I won't return after the clip that I'm about to play for you, I'll take a moment now to say, if this conversation raises any questions or reflections for you, feel free to reach out to me directly. You know I'm always happy to hear from you. Okay, without further ado, here's the final piece of my conversation with Jim. You may have your own helplessness in you, Jim, because of your history with your parents or your upbringing. But if your daughter has some of these traits, we're not diagnosing her of vulnerable narcissism, right? We know there's a feeling of helplessness inside of her as well, that she can't manage her life. Whether she talks about it or not, it's irrelevant. We know it's probably there, right? But one way to communicate that is through this thing we call projective identification, which is to put it in somebody else. So that's why I wanted to go back to it, because you can actually use your feeling, Jim. Like, don't discard it or just walk away saying what's wrong with me or this is weak that I'm crying. You can also look at it as a form of communication that your daughter's trying to show you in a very powerful way. Not pleasant, right? It's not pleasant to have this put onto you, right? But she's trying to show you what it feels like to be her, if that makes sense. I don't know if that resonates at all or if that's clear.
It's clear what you're saying. I don't see it as clear as her actions. I would have to really think about that in some depth and see what happens when I interact with her again.
Well, just think of any interaction where you give her a suggestion and you see nothing changes, right? And she continues to suffer. Okay, you mentioned the boyfriend. There it is. There's an example. So it sounds to me like the boyfriend drives you crazy, right? But there's nothing you could do about it, you see? So in other words, you have your own feeling of helplessness there. But all I'm asking you to consider, and this will help sort of cool you down a little bit, is that it may not just be your feelings. She may be feeling helpless to get out of the relationship herself. She can't do it.
Well, I believe that. And I think, like, personally, I think the therapy she needs is addiction therapy, not because she's doing drugs. He's the drug and she's the addict. That's how I believe their relationship is. I believe she doesn't know how to get out of it, and she knows it's not good for her.
Yeah.
So that's right. How my approach is, that she's an addict.
If it's truly like an abusive relationship or one that she's not happy, right? Maybe it has volatility, ups and downs. There's, I don't know if you've listened to these episodes. I've done a few episodes on something called a trauma bond. But basically, that's when two people come together and there's this really intense relationship that, unfortunately, on the surface, to you and me, looks dysfunctional. But for them, it works wonderfully. That's why they can't break it off. In other words, it works for them. And until you can appreciate, or she can appreciate, why that kind of relationship works for her, it's really hard to extract oneself from it. And she may be in that kind of what we call like trauma bond relationship. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I could see that.
Yeah. And that's the reason, by the way, why, Jim, I hate to tell you this, but you don't know what's best for her, you see? You think you know what's best for her, but
Right.
being in that relationship, again, even if it's pathological, is the thing that is best for her at this moment because it's fulfilling something in her. It's not pleasant. It's not nice to think about it this way, right? It sounds crazy. How could that kind of relationship possibly fulfill anything in her? But you won't know the answer to that until you could get much closer to it and understand all of what it means to her to be in that kind of relationship. But that's not going to happen if your position is you need to get out of that relationship and you keep presenting reality, which is look how harmful it is for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've from other times that I've listened to your podcast or the other time we spoke, I do know that for anyone to stay in a situation, there has to be something in their mind good there.
Yes.
Something is feeding a need.
Yep.
Even if it's negative. It's feeding something. And I don't know what that is because I can't for the life of me understand that.
Well, you will be able to if as we go through, maybe if we get to some of your other questions, but if as you begin to understand, you don't know the right way, Jim, right? You don't know what's best for her. And if you could really begin to believe that, that will free you up to begin to get closer to her. And that's then what really a relationship is, by the way. That's a definition. I was in a conference yesterday, and I'm not quoting, I'm just sort of paraphrasing, but the woman said, you're never in a relationship until you're really genuinely curious about the other person. So unless you can be genuinely curious about why this relationship works for her without judgments, right, or your own agenda, then you're never really in a relationship, according to this woman from that conference yesterday.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah, so genuine curiosity is what brings people together, in other words.
Yeah, but obviously my emotions sometimes get the best of me, and that's my struggle. My personal struggle is how to navigate this under a banner of what I think I know what's best for her.
Exactly.
By her actions.
Yep. So let's go. Tell me another question. Maybe as we go through a couple more, we can help you get to that point, at least a little bit more today. Okay,
so I wrote some stuff down here, and here is one. We kind of touched on this with when we talk about the containment.
Yes.
I'm putting the fault on my own, pertaining to your Vulnerable Narcissist podcast. This is a question I asked, and we touched on it a little bit already, about how long can the helper sustain this relationship of I will take the heat, I will take the blame.
Yes.
Even though I don't think I'm wrong.
Okay.
The helper. Like, how long can a relationship last and someone can sustain that?
Yes.
So I would assume most relationships like that don't last.
Okay, so let's talk about that one, because in the question, right, the question is how long can you sustain that? But say it again. Can you just repeat it just so I want it fresh in my mind. I got the how long part, but you said something. Oh, what was it? Take the fault, like that it's your fault? Was that it?
When you talk about, this is my question, when you talk about containment and how I should rephrase a question or taking fault on my own actions to appease them.
Okay, wait, stop there. Okay, thank you. Okay, again, thank you for this question, because if it was confusing to you, I imagine many listeners were confused by this. So the first thing I want to say is, let me just review containment again, very briefly. I had a feeling, remember I said it would come up later?
Yeah.
But the act of containment really is like made up of several different components. One is validating. So the validating piece, again, just to take it away from your daughter for a moment and go back to the situation of making the eggs, right? Mm-hmm. That would look like what, Jim? That you could really appreciate how upsetting it would be. That they were expecting to have their eggs over easy, and then you presented them sunny side up. And you see what I'm just making this up, but the point is validating. Even though you may not agree with it and you think it's ridiculous, okay? That's irrelevant, because they have a feeling, and you want to acknowledge that you heard that they have a feeling and not dismiss it. So that's the first piece. But the second, and I'll sort of put these together just to save us some time, has to do then with taking a feeling in, detoxifying it, and then giving it back in a more manageable way. So really all that means, Jim, is that you are not taking responsibility. You're not taking on like that it's your fault. You see, that's the main point that I wanted to clarify, because you and maybe other people have heard this and they're thinking that you have to like apologize, right? Like that you're always eating it in some way, right? Not the eggs, but you know what I mean? The criticism. Yeah. So no, that's not it, because that would really wear you down quite quickly and demoralize you. So I don't want anybody doing that. But what it does look like then is they hand you something very hot. She's getting pushed around by her boyfriend and she tells you this, right? Or the eggs weren't cooked correctly. Whatever it is, you could fill in the blank here. They hand you something that's affectively charged, basically. That's the main point. And rather than reacting, see, this is where it's really, really hard. You could validate how hard it is for, like, how you heard what they said, and then you give it back in a way that's more manageable. And all that part means is that you don't give advice. You don't step into the dynamic with them. You don't give suggestions. And by the way, in your case, Jim, you don't apologize. You don't eat it, because that's in the dynamic now, as if you did something wrong. And that's not what's going to lead to genuine change. There's a lot more to say, but let me just pause there and see if any of this is like confusing or what's not clear. So play it out with me as you're hearing it. Like, what are you hearing?
Well, I understood it differently.
Yes.
Prior to us talking. So I took it as, like I said, I'll take the heat. I'll take the blame. Maybe I didn't hear you, how you liked your eggs last week. My bad, my fault. Yeah. And that's where my question came up. Like, how could someone who is very self-aware put themselves in a situation so often to say, I'm going to take the blame for this. Yeah. So he or she will feel better. Yeah. I just didn't know. But you clarified it with me. Like, it's really not about taking the heat and apologizing for it. It's kind of like, I know there's a deeper issue there.
Yes.
I know it's not about the eggs. I'm not going to fight with you about it. And I'm not going to give you advice, which is good too, because I tend to say, well, why don't you do?
Yes.
Why didn't you do this? This would have been better for you, type of thing in my relationship.
Yes. Wait, Jim, but I must have, like, I'm thinking now that since you said it that way, maybe the way I originally presented it wasn't clear. That's what I started to think. Because if you were confused, maybe I didn't present it the best way. But then I had a second thought, which is, if in fact you really didn't hear her and you recognize that to be a truth, like if she says, you know, I already told you the way that I like my eggs, and you and your mind were like, oh yeah, now I remember it. Then just so you know, Jim, an apology is appropriate. Okay. So that in that case, I'm taking back what I said a moment ago. If you really do remember that she did tell you this and you forgot for whatever reason, I think then an apology is in order, because then you could imagine how hurtful that is that she spoke to you. I forgot the word you used. Oh, not that they would disappear, but that the invisible. I think you used that word earlier, right? So when you use that word, you told me already, you can imagine how painful it is for her, right? To not feel heard, right? So then in that case, I could imagine you could say something like, listen, you're right. I'm sorry. You did say that to me. And I can imagine how painful that is for you not to be heard. So whatever, you know.
Yeah, I see the difference.
Yeah. Okay.
And when I wrote my question was coming from a place of, it's not like I remembered how you like your eggs. Right. I just screwed up. It's really I was coming from the place of, all right, how do I paint a picture that I screwed up to make that person feel better? And I'm kind of using hand motions to exaggerate, you know, like, okay, I'll calm him down by taking the heat and taking the blame. That's where I was coming from. How can you sustain that? I mean, if I genuinely said, oh, that's right, we talked about the car trip and then the camping and then how you like your eggs, I would apologize.
You know, and I totally agree with you. That is not sustainable. If you're constantly altering your responses, right, to her needs, right, you're going to feel like you're bending over backwards. Then you're going to feel, you know, that's what leads to your own resentment, right?
And that's personally what's happened to me. And that was one of my questions too. Like, I can see how the helper can become the helpless. Yes. When they don't adhere to your advice or your plan for them or what you think would be great.
Yes.
You know?
Yep.
So that's where I came from too.
Yep. So, and I'm in agreement. Then it's not sustainable. You can't do that. And I wouldn't advise it. So what would you do instead? That's the question. So if you know now you're not going to be apologizing, right? Because it's not like you forgot something that she told you. You clarified that wasn't the situation. So then an apology isn't warranted. So then what do you do, right? Want to try? Want to take a crack at it? Or
Yeah, let's go. Let's go.
Okay, so here, containment. Just always go back to containment. The first thing is you're still going to validate it, right? Because you still can appreciate she's upset, even though it's not based in reality. That's irrelevant. We'll get to that next. I promise you, okay? But at that moment, she's upset and she's dysregulated. I mean, you may have heard me use this word before in prior episodes. So she's dysregulated because she feels so hurt and invisible. So that's what really needs to be dealt with. Forget about the eggs. Forget about apologizing. Your only goal right then, Jim, is to help her get into a more regulated state of mind. And you can only do that if you're in a regulated state of mind and you don't feel blamed. Okay, so that's the first biggest thing, is that you're not frustrated with her accusation, okay? Because if you're frustrated, it doesn't work.
I can't take it personally.
So you can't take it personally because you know it's not about you, that she's in a dysregulated state of mind because you've made the eggs the same way for the last 6 months and she never complained, right? Again, but this is the kind of stuff, it seems absurd, but that's what happens when someone's in that kind of state of mind. Now, it could be just the day before she was arguing with her boyfriend, you see? But you don't know what's going on. But anyway, the point is that the first step is always still validation to help her try to calm down. And you, Jim, recognizing that she's dysregulated right now. That's why she's attacking you. Okay? Now, if you sense that she calms down even a little bit, then you could begin to talk to her about what? That you don't want her to feel this way. And the question is whether you and her could talk about what you could do about it going forward, whatever it is, right? I mean, it could be the breakfast, getting breakfast ready, or something with her boyfriend. I don't know. Because what's not happening, and I don't know if you get this feeling, you could tell me, but as if she's placing pressure on you, right, Jim? Forget about the eggs. Like if you just think about real life experiences with her, if she's putting pressure on you, which I know she is, because she comes to you with problems that are unsolvable, right? Because she doesn't take advice or listen or anything, nothing changes, right? If you're feeling a certain way, again, I go back to using that then to understand her and using that to say, she is not communicating about the content. In other words, whatever the issue is, that's not what's going on. It's about an emotion right now, and I need to deal with the emotion, not the content. In other words, don't treat it concretely as if it's just about the boyfriend or the eggs or whatever it is she comes to you with. Go ahead. Okay. You go. You tell me. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't come with a plan and a solution and try to tell her, well, this is what I think will work. Like you said, feed on the emotion. Well,
yes.
What makes you feel that way?
Yes.
Point out, she brought to the conversation how she feels on a specific thing. I can elaborate on that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Or help her elaborate on that.
Okay.
Right? You see the difference?
Yeah. Then me coming in with a plan, a solution, how we can execute it. This is what you should do.
Yeah, because you're holding all the emotional baggage then, you see? Yeah. And then there it is again. The emotion that you experienced earlier in the interview, that's because you're holding all the emotional baggage, that you have this vision in mind, Jim, that there's a right way to do these things. Like if you could just give her the best advice, the perfect advice, ideally she's going to hear it and things are going to change. I was going to say, I wish it worked that way, but if it did, I would be out of business, right? Because I could just advise people on what to do and their problems would go away, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, my emotional outburst, I want to apologize.
No, there's no need. You don't even have to.
Yeah, so again, in my situation, I'm so fearful of the damage she's going to do to herself. And this is why I want to intervene.
Yes.
Because I think she doesn't know coping skills. So if she gets to a point where she feels so bad about her decisions, it keeps her there.
Yes.
Then when she's met the deadline at work or at school and got all her assignments in, and that adrenaline, that she felt good about that. That's what I'm trying to focus on and try to get her there. Like, you could be better. You could be good. You could be you, that I know. So I just feel about how much damage can I watch and how the rock bottom, like what is going to be her rock bottom before she gets the help. I'm trying to implement my thoughts and feelings into her so she doesn't hit the rock bottom and
Yes.
sees it before that, because I fear of the damage it might do. But I know I have no control over that.
Well, no control, number one. And you know something else. If you can remember from earlier in the interview, what did we say? That's an important process for them to go through, remember?
Right.
As painful as it is, there's going to be value in that as well.
Mm-hmm. And if there's a lesson that needs to be learned and she doesn't learn it, she will repeat this behavior.
And that's what's happening today. It just
and I know
repeating.
that.
Yeah.
Right. I was wondering, how do you know if the helpless person demands or requests are genuine requests, or are they just demands to fill the lack of their emotional disconnect? Like, what is real? Is there like demand? Like they'll say it as a demand, like, you need to make the egg scenario. You need to make my eggs this way because I really like them. And you genuinely like, I really like my eggs this way. Or is it, I want to control this situation and I want to see that you're going to do what I tell you to do. That's going to fill.
That's it.
You know,
right there, Jim.
it's kind of like, and how does someone, a helper, be like, this is a real genuine thing I can approach?
No, you just said it. Listen, you started to answer the question in what you just said, right? If you go back just like 6 seconds, you said like, I think you used the word control. I think that word just came up, right? And that's one of the ways. There are a couple of ways you could distinguish between the two, but a genuine request usually leaves room, Jim, for your autonomy. In other words, it respects your limits. So it may sound something like, just think of any request. Like I gave this example also in those episodes where a friend calls late at night and they need to talk to you like right away. But if it's a genuine request, it would look more like, hey, would you be up to talking a little bit later? Or, hey, are you free later today or tomorrow? Or, hey, when are you free so that we could talk? Or I know you're busy, right? In other words, it's not emotionally charged. So, Jim, if what's coming at you with a request elicits a feeling in you, again, trust your feeling. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier when I said your feelings are valuable, remember? And then I went on a bit of a digression about projective identification. Right. But if you get a feeling, Jim, inside of you that you're being pressured, most likely the request is not about the request. Again, an egg is not always an egg, okay? Right?
Right.
So that's one way to tell the difference if they're not respecting your autonomy. And then the true litmus test is what? How are you feeling inside? Are you feeling some kind of projection? Pressure, right? I slipped because it could be the projection again, right? Like if you're feeling helpless, she may be feeling helpless because you don't know what just happened to her the night before. And maybe nothing happened, but she had a bad dream. And maybe it wasn't even a dream, but it was a fear that her boyfriend was going to leave her. But she can't regulate that. You see, that's the main point. I know we're coming back, but good. Review is always good. If she cannot regulate an intense emotion, it gets put onto you, Jim, you see? And that's why the true litmus test is, how do I feel when this request comes at me? And if you're feeling pressured or devalued in some sort of way, that could be evidence then that this is not about what it seems, right? Okay. Now, again, for everybody listening, and for you too, Jim, I just want to distinguish one thing or make it very clear. When your daughter does this or anybody does this to you, this is not an intentional, malicious attack on you, okay? This stuff is often unconscious. She doesn't even know she's doing this. You see what I mean? Like she doesn't know like that she's, I hate this word, but like manipulating you into some sort of position. Like sometimes it could be a little closer to consciousness, by the way. Right?
Yeah. Right.
But it's not, let me say it's not always conscious. Sometimes it is. Yes.
And you think it's less conscious? Overall.
Usually it's less conscious, unless, to go back when I said this earlier, you're caught up in some sort of dynamic with her where the two of you play out certain things and she's the provocateur and you're the helpless one. And then it switches when you're giving her the advice or punishing her, or maybe like when you said your ex-wife gives her an ultimatum. Now she's the powerful one and your daughter could be the helpless one. So these things switch, but this is like a dynamic that gets played out. Again, we call that an enactment. But that's a whole nother story. We don't need to get into that. But that's one way to tell the difference between, is it a genuine need or is it meant to make you feel a certain way? Is it meant to help her regulate by dumping it on you, Jim? You see what I mean? So even though she maybe knows that it makes you feel a certain way, she much rather you deal with the emotion, whatever it is in her, than her deal with it. But let me pause before I go on, because there are other ways you could tell whether it's genuine or not. But any questions, or is that clear? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I think from what you're saying, I would have to feel, all right, gauge my emotions. Do I feel attacked by this request or comment? Or is it really a demand?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's just they didn't choose the right words and I'm taking it and I'm overly hypersensitive.
A very good point. That's right. Yes.
So, yeah, I could see that. And from what you're saying, typically it's not a demand. It's how it's phrased, and it's how in my case, I would perceive that.
It's not a demand about the manifest content. So don't get caught up in that. It is a demand for you to regulate an emotion of hers that she can't regulate. So if you could keep your eye on that, hopefully it lets you be a little bit more empathic rather than upset with her. So in other words, don't treat it like you just screwed up the eggs and nothing you do is right and she's so frustrating. But treat it like she's in a dysregulated state. She can't say that. She doesn't even know it, but putting something on me with great intensity right now. Things are getting intense, right? Because you could feel that. That's going back to the feeling, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So those are two ways so far. Another way is, and we spoke about this, to know if it's a genuine request for your help, or if it's a manipulation of some sort or an attempt to get you to regulate something for her, is, does anything change? Does she listen to you? Does she seem to feel better? And the answer to that, already, is no. You told me that before. Mm-hmm. So that's another way you could tease it out. Does it resolve anything? Does anything get resolved, or do you still go over the same things, just different iterations of it? Then it's not genuine, right, Jim? Because nothing is really getting resolved. And here's the most important way to distinguish between the two. I saved this one to last because it is the most important. Do you have a feeling that there's a collaboration? In other words, that it's two people in the room thinking about the problem together. So whatever the problem is that they come to you with, are they talking to you in a way that puts pressure on you? Or are they talking to you in a way that you feel like you're working together? Mm-hmm. And they're problem solving with you. You're not holding all the baggage again, to go back to that metaphor we used earlier.
Yes, I see that. I mean, in my case, I would say, no, it's not a conversation. We're not two people invested in a goal.
Yep.
It's more because of her personality, she shuts down. I'll give my parents the forum to talk, and I'll listen, and then I'm off. And it really doesn't have much of a response.
Exactly.
When we talk about it.
Yeah, and that's typically the way it presents with people. Again, not diagnosing her, but who have these traits. Mm-hmm. There's not two people in the room. It's one-sided. Yeah. And then that means there's not space for two people to exist with what? Your own thoughts and feelings. And believe it or not, opinions are okay when there's this collaborative work that's going on. And when someone's receptive and open and asking for it. Remember before we were saying don't give her an opinion, but that was very specific to her in that state of mind. But if she was in a more collaborative state of mind, then you should be free, of course, to give an opinion. Because now you got two separate people in the room. Right. You see what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also kind of like, to dummy it down, I would never have an argument with someone who's drunk. They're not even like, I can't have an argument with you. You're drunk. I'm not, or whatever.
Yes.
It's going to go nowhere. It's not even going to be remembered.
Yes.
So it's kind of like that same, if we're not both invested in this.
Yeah. Or like your 89-year-old aging mother. You know what I mean? Yeah, like it's the same concept, right? Like you're going to get mad at your 89-year-old mother because she forgot something, or she didn't prepare the eggs correctly, or something like that.
Right.
So anyway, the goal then, just with that all in mind, in case you're curious or the listeners are curious, the next logical question would be, okay, so if it's not genuine, how do I help her? If you're interested in doing that, right, Jim? How do I help her or us get to a place where it is a more collaborative effort, the way that I was just describing, where there are two people in the room? And again, that's where the act, believe it or not, I know I keep going over this, but that's where the act of containment comes in. The validating, getting her into a more regulated state of mind, right? Asking inquisitive questions, trying to negotiate things with her so that you get her input and it's not just you or your ex-wife, where it feels like it turns into more of a speech, rather than a collaboration. right?
Well, I think clarifying that helped, because I did take the containment as, I'll just take it on my shoulders so they'll feel better for the day and we'll both have a better day.
Yeah, so I'll just say that in a different way. Containment does not mean that you are a passive punching bag, okay? You're not a punching bag, right? Yeah. We covered a lot today, Jim, and I really appreciate you coming back on the podcast and trying to flush out some of these things. I hope there's at least a little bit more clarity in your mind based on what we spoke about.
No, there definitely is. There definitely is. And I know I don't have to apologize for this, but my intent wasn't to get a therapy lesson here and stuff. It was, to answer questions, but my breakdown just...
Listen, no worries. You know what? No worries about it at all. It's all part of the experience. And I have to tell you, I appreciate the authenticity, right? It's not like you felt something and you needed to fake it or behave a certain way. So don't worry about that. It's all good.
All right. Well, I didn't want to, that wasn't my intention to go in that direction. I wanted to talk about these things that I found interesting.
But listen, keep listening to the podcast.
I will.
And you're always welcome back. I'm not sure how much you want to come back after today's interview, but you're always welcome, because I said it at the beginning. Your questions are really thoughtful. And if you're sort of struggling with these questions, I know there are so many listeners out there that are going to benefit from you raising the questions and taking the time to be here with all of us to sort of flush them out a little bit further. So thanks again, Jim.
Well, if I can help, well, my pleasure.
All right,
thank you.
All right, until next time, Jim.
All right.
Everybody else. Okay. Bye for now.
Take care.
Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.